Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it is Tuesday. It's October 1st, 2024. We're about a month out from the election. Tonight is going to be the vice presidential election. That ought to be really interesting to watch if anybody does bother to do it. I mean, it's going to be seeing how this guy Waltz performs. My guess is it's going to be bizarre. At any rate, we'll get to that in a minute. You can follow me on X at Corsi Jerome 1 and on Substack Jerome Corsi PhD.substack.com. As to God's Five Stones, I was on Eric Metaxas' show yesterday. I believe that'll be probably shown today. All right, so it's God's, G-O-D, no apostrophe S, 5, you spell out F-I-V-E, and stones is plural, S-T-O-N-E-S. We're doing a lot on the algorithms. I'm going to be reporting on Wisconsin today, and we'll be doing much more on Wisconsin. Wisconsin's got an enormous number of clones. The Democrats are setting out, the only way the Democrats can possibly win this election at this point is to steal it. And I think we've got to do increasing attention as to what we're going to do to stop the steal. Now, the God's Five Stones, I'm going to begin focusing on how we prevent these algorithms from being used. I think one of the things we've got to do is we've got to get some lawyers in place who are ready to challenge elections if they go to Kamala Harris and to Waltz in the last minute, especially as we see these cycles. I mean, there's a predictable way that these algorithms get used. What happens is that, first of all, the losing candidate, like Kamala, begins to surge, and we build this narrative about her beginning to surge, and the mainstream media beats the drums to make it believable to people that she has a chance to be popular at all. And then as that gets to be believable, and these non-voters are voted by the Democrats, then the steal is a possibility. So what we have to watch is we have to see this pattern develop. And as it develops, we have to be ready to immediately challenge the election with fraud before it gets certified. We have to try to block the certification from happening and being expedited by the Democrats. As soon as they can lock in the votes that they want, they're going to try to certify the election to shut everybody up and then make it impossible to challenge the election in the courts. We're dealing with a demonic Democratic Party. They're not just communists. They're now satanic. What things they want to do to destroy, they want to mutilate children sexually. They want to have abortion at the last minute, maybe even after the baby's born. If you don't want the baby, kill it. That used to be called, infanticide, but now it's just considered to be the extension of the right of a woman to choose. The right of the woman to choose does not include killing a life. If it does, we're headed towards paganism. We're headed towards barbarism. We're headed towards child sacrifice. I mean, I want to continue to expose the things that are going on the left for the Satanism that is dominating Hollywood and is dominating Silicon Valley. We're going to explore more of this. But to the election, we've got to be ready to challenge when the election steal is going on. I think there's several ways we can do it. Number one is getting lawyers in position ready to pounce as soon as we see an election stolen. In states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona. And we now have this very interesting Arizona case where it's clear that the Arizona governor knew that there was actual voter fraud going on. That this whole conversation that was recorded, where it was made clear that, in fact, there were illegal votes, maybe 100,000 illegal voters on the rolls. And the governor is saying in Arizona, well, we can't let anybody know about that, because that'll validate what everybody has been saying here. Suddenly we'll have the truth come out. We can't dare have the truth come out about the fact that, we've had illegal voting in Arizona, and the election was largely stolen in Arizona. We can't let the truth about that out. So again, we're facing a dark um, presence in everything that the left is doing, and the left knows it's lying and it's cheating, and they don't seem to care. That's the issue that we're dealing with, is that they don't seem to care, and as such, we're in a situation where we're fighting evil. Okay, the other thing I think we can do is I think we can have challenges from the people who are poll watchers, who say they want to go out now and actually um, go into the polls, and if there's massive mail-in voting, which there's going to be, sample some of those and go out and find out whether those people really exist or not. In other words, I think the challenge ought to be made immediately that these mail-in votes are fraudulent, and demand that we know that there's a real person behind that vote. Again, the Democrats have gone and they've harvested all these registrations. They go out into a community, and if somebody wants to register 12 times, they let them register 12 times, and they get 12 mail-in ballots. And what's to prevent them from filing all 12 of those ballots? So I think it's not only that we've exposed the algorithms, we know that they're there, but now we have to be ready to do the legal challenges that are going to prevent the steal. So this time it's us in there in the courts right away, not waiting until after these votes are certified, not taking the time to let them all debate for 2 or 3 days and count votes and say we haven't got the votes counted yet. All of that is as soon as we see that going on, we need to be in the courts and do something to get this stopped. Because if the courts won't act at all, we're in a desperate situation. If the courts, in the face of obvious stealing, do nothing, we've lost the country already. So I think if we go to God's 5 stones, follow us. We're going to be posting a lot of new material this week. And I think the new material we're posting, which is already showing that I think the intelligence agencies are running the elections. And I think they're doing it in the open, increasingly in the open. Okay, let's shift to a couple of other topics. I'm following what's going on in the Middle East very closely. So what's going on now is that Israel has begun a ground campaign in Lebanon. So overnight, this Operation Northern Arrows with the Israeli Defense Force is beginning to move into, say, it's localized, limited, and targeted raids against Hezbollah terror targets in the border area of southern Lebanon. Okay, so it's not a full-scale invasion of Lebanon, but the targets are these villages on the border. They're an immediate threat to the Israeli communities. And the Israeli Air Force and the IDF artillery are supporting the ground forces. We've seen massive strikes. We've seen massive explosions and massive strikes. And this Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, was killed. Now that's a major step. Nasrallah was a friend of Ayatollah Khomeini, and he was desperately anti-Jewish. Israel is acting this time differently. Israel's now viewing this as an existential threat. That with the Hamas attack, which so brutally killed Israelis, unarmed Israelis, that thanks to Israelis left also disarming the Israeli citizenry, I think there's a whole new consciousness now in Israel that survival is as at stake. And so there's a new determination to get rid of Hezbollah, to get rid of Hamas. And I would say to Iran, watch out. That I think Israel will next target Iran. And I don't think Russia or the United States is going to stop Israel this time. Of course, the Obama faction of Obama is still running the Democratic Party. I mean, let's face it. Obama is the guy who shows up and goes to Cairo in 2000 and after he wins the election in 2008 and I guess it was his 2008 and shows up and says he has experienced Islam on 3 continents. When I wrote the book Abomination, I made it clear that Obama was raised as a Muslim, and he has denied this But again, the school records from Indonesia show he was in school as a Muslim, and he was raised in Indonesia by his stepfather as a Muslim. So again, Obama has been lying about his background and his past. But if Israel is now extending the bombing, including to Syria, and bombing targets all through the Middle East, I think the next target's going to be Iran. And I expect this Israeli offensive to extend into Iran very quickly. Okay, let's look at a couple of other stories. And I'm tracking a number of things economically, and what I'm seeing is that we have the potential here for a massive crash. There is simply far too much debt in the world, and the debt in the world is, I think, we see it reflected in the price of gold. So gold right now is trading at $2,655 an ounce. When I first started talking about this, it was about $1,900 an ounce. It could have made a handsome profit already, taking the advice we've been giving, which is going into gold. Precious metals, I think, are going to dramatically increase, and I don't see an end in sight. So if we can show Christopher will show the book on how the coming global crash will create a historic gold rush. Call Swiss America 1-800-519-6268. I'm going to develop a new program with Swiss America, which is taking your IRAs and your 401ks and putting them into gold. We'll be defining that program here in the next little bit of time. But I think it's going to be a major program and a major opportunity that I want to expand on for the remainder of this year, going into next year. The next year is just around the corner. We're already now today into the fourth quarter of the year, and so we're headed into the election in about a month, and we're going to be then into winter, and the economy, I think, is going to be again an issue that's slowing down. If the Democrats win, I don't see the continuation of this continuous spending, the spending. And when we look at what's happened globally, we see the shift to China is well underway. There's a good, interesting article here that Pepe Escobar has written, showing that in the period of time from 1980 to 2020, Europe's share of global GDP fell from 26% to 15%. Pretty large drop. The decline in the United States was smaller. We went from 21% of the global economy in the 1980s to less than 16 in 2020. Okay, now Asia and East Asia are on the rise. Their share of the global economy in 1980 was 11.5%, and it's risen to 25%. And China has been made the most extensive contribution. 18% of the world's GDP is now in China. So the center of economic activity is shifting from this Atlantic-centric, which was the case during the 1980s, to a more Eurasian-centric. And it's possible that coming up, you're going to see the rise of China is inevitable. I've been saying this for decades. The rise of China is inevitable. But the point is that Russia and China, the leaders really of the BRIC nations, they're going to have a summit in Kazan next month. They could easily declare that the yuan and the ruble are going to combine in a gold alliance with a gold-backed currency. And that's going to, again, make it harder for the dollar to maintain its world position as the world's reserve currency for international trade. Our share has already declined dramatically. The dollar's share of bilateral trade has fallen from 80% to less than 50%. So the dollar's already being eased out by the yuan. And I'm encouraging people to call Swiss America. You've got to have some gold and silver. And it will be a hedge against the declining purchasing power of the dollar. This is an inevitable consequence, and I don't see any reversal or change in it. Chris, I'm going to cover one more story that I'm going to want ask you to comment on what we're covering today. So kind of get ready. But we're also seeing that the U.S. ports strike is now going to happen. It's the first shutdown in 50 years, and it's going to mean ports all across the eastern seaboard could be closing, which is going to have a dramatic impact on the supply chain in the United States. Once supplies are no longer available coming in through the ports, we're so dependent these days on international manufacturing and international trade that I can see that we will have a massive shutdown of the economy beginning to occur right as we're going into this election. Again, this should hurt the Democrats. But again, I don't think it's going to be a normal election for the Democrats, because I think the Democrats' only surviving strategy is to steal the election. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I'm with you on that. The everything's falling into place against the Democrats at this point. You talked about what's going on in the Middle East. That continues to escalate, and there's absolutely no way this administration can control what's going on. You have the BRICS nations ready to supplant the dollar soon, very soon, because they know they have a very short window unless we have the shenanigans, and that's where you're going here. Now you're going to see the supply chains get heavily disrupted by this strike, which I find interesting because on the ground floor, if people can't get their orders, or if here's what happened to me back in the back during the COVID years. A deer ran into my car, hit the front, and it's a Hyundai. And nothing wrong with the company, but the supply chain killed it so much that it took about 3 to 4 months to actually get a bumper from overseas into the country. That's what happened. Everything was so backed up there. Factories were closed. When it might not be to that degree, but we're going to see a lot of heavy problems when it comes to importing things. Prices are going to go way up, and it's not going to look good for this administration.
Well, the thing I can see happening in this kind of an economic slowdown is it cascades. In other words, what hits in one place then spills into other areas.
Right.
So the supply chain right now is so intricately dependent upon getting parts from overseas that we don't have a U.S.-centric supply chain any longer. We're dependent on international parts coming in because we're manufacturing them overseas. And as we're shifting away from U.S. manufacturing, which is not stopped, in fact, under this current regime of Biden, it's hard to say Biden-Harris because Biden was not really even fully conscious the entire time he was president.
Oh, it could be the Jill Biden administration, but that's at least for the day-to-day
It was
operations.
Obama's third term, and I think people are
Yeah.
getting. And I'm for one, I was sick of Obama before it started. I mean, I wrote The Abomination trying to prevent this guy from having any political power, but people liked the hip hop. He had a lot of charisma, and
The swag.
people ignored the fact that his goals were to destroy America. And I said that from the beginning. He was raised by Frank Marshall Davis, who was an out-and-out communist who hated the United States. Okay, I want to cover a few more things. The Ukrainian army is in bad shape. There's an article on Remix News, and they cover Ukraine very thoroughly. So the Ukrainian army is suffering from a steady decline in its capabilities, is according to a Polish news outlet. In terms of the 50 to 70% of recruits survive only a few days at the front line. Okay, because the soldiers are prone to panic. They're not well trained. They're older, and so therefore Ukraine is just rushing these people into battle without any real adequate military training or preparation. Now, facing the Russian army, I don't think you want to go into it with a group of older, less motivated recruits who are prone to panic. And so, you've had what have been pointing out since the beginning of June 2030, any number of multiple offensives that have been either incurred, but when Ukraine tries an offensive or when Russia has an offensive, the result is the same: extensive losses, and increased reliance in Kiev of conscripting soldiers to fight, going out and taking them off the streets to fight. So, of the 100 people who joined some of these units in fighting for Ukraine last fall, only 10 to 20 remained. The rest are dead, wounded, or disabled. Now, you can't field an army successfully with these kinds of results, and they're catastrophic results. Yet at the same time, NATO continues to provoke Russia. So NATO is now saying, well, we're going to get these long-range missiles, and we're going to fire them deep into Russia. Well, what's that going to accomplish? It's not going to accomplish anything in terms of military strategy. We're going to hit a few targets in Russia. Well, I'm sure Russia is going to love that. And increasingly, Putin is dealing with a wider conflict with the West. And he knows that essentially that it's the United States and NATO, Europe, that have armed Ukraine, pouring billions of dollars into military equipment, with the corruption there, much of it being stolen. So the entire nature of the Ukrainian war is one based on corruption, money being stolen, troops rushed into battle who are not trained. Russia has control of these two provinces, which have always been last 1,000 years Russian speaking. And Putin made this clear in the interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. Okay, so Putin's not going to back down. He's not going to suddenly decide he should pull out of these two provinces. Putin's going to continue to be there, and he's going to keep the gains he's made, because this gives Russia a firm foothold on Sevastopol, on Crimea, on the Black Sea, and Russia needs the Black Sea for access to the Mediterranean for its southern route to the Atlantic. I think this is, again, a losing strategy. So what I see is the potential here, especially if Kamala wins, this State Department will go into a nuclear confrontation with Russia, while at the same time we're building in the Middle East to where I think the next target for Israel is going to be Iran, and Iran may or may not have some nuclear weapons already, but we're probably about to find out. The world has never been in a more dangerous position, as far as I can see, certainly not in my lifetime, where we're threatening a world war that could go nuclear and an economy that could disintegrate before our eyes, with an election on the table that is inevitably going to result in the Democrats trying to steal it. Chris, why don't you comment on this as well? And I want to do a couple more things, and then we'll wrap up.
Again, you're one. Did you see the part in the article where there was an ex post saying that Zelensky was going to recruit or is working on recruiting prisoners now? This country, Ukraine, the Zelensky administration is incredibly desperate. But are they desperate to win this war, or are they desperate to keep getting the foreign aid and kind of distribute that within themselves? Again, accusation. I don't have a lot of proof of that, but it's a question I believe we should be asking ourselves and asking asking our administrations.
Yeah, I mean, with Israel going into southern Lebanon and the bombing and everything going on there, and there's spectacular images on the internet of the amount of bombing being done. And Israel is extremely capable of destroying Hezbollah. They're degrading Hezbollah and Hamas. The next target's going to be Iran and the Revolutionary Guard. And Israel is going to say, we're resetting the table. I want to take a look at the bombing that's going on. You see the massive amount of bombing. Just watch all this. I mean, these are massive explosions, targeted. Israel knows what it's doing. It knows where I've done all their intelligence for years, knowing where Hezbollah is and where Hamas is. And so therefore, Israel's still rooting Hamas out of the Gaza, going after the tunnels. And there's quite a few of these videos, Chris. Maybe play another one if you can find it, of the massive bombing. They're very impressive. To me, I watched them because, again, they're targeted. And the targeting is very precise. I think this is one that is in Syria, this one here that you're about to show.
Yeah, that's where it is. I'm going to pull it up on X right here, make it a little easier to play,
Sure.
and so people can watch what's going on. Let's see how they That's a photo. Here's the video. It's a very short video plus a photo right there.
Yeah, it's just again, the massive. There's many of these here, being shown on X, and the targeting is what impressed me so much. Is the ability to take out certain buildings and to take them out strategically, very tactically, I guess you'd say, in terms of hitting just that building for a particular reason. The reason being intelligence, which says that that's one of the headquarters or one of the operating centers for Hezbollah. And when you look back at the determination, that's another spectacular one. I think that was one where they were burning up an oil field. I believe that was being blown up. These are remarkable images coming out of the Middle East. But again, the violence going on in the world has stepped up. And then you've got the UN coming in saying, well, we're going to be the new world government. Well, that's great. I mean, without the U.S. funding, the UN shuts down. I think it would be better if the UN just did shut down.
Yeah. Again, it was a place. It should have been a place where the nations would have some coffee and maybe talk about some differences and relax a bit and leave, go home and govern their own countries. But it became a means. And interestingly enough, President Wilson and his administration wouldn't join the League of Nations, partially because of the idea that the idea was to form a one world government.
Well, Wilson was fully in favor of it. Wilson was a Hegelian.
Right.
And he did the brilliant things like creating the Federal Reserve and wanting to belong to the League of Nations. And he gave this, fighting this war to end all wars, war to, going into World War I, which I still question whether we needed to go into World War I. I mean, again, it was Wilson's ambitions to strive towards this one world government, which he saw as the end of time, the end of the culmination of human history. Well, if one world government ends up in another Tower of Babel, where these people think that they can challenge heaven, like the original Tower of Babel, it's a satanic project. And there's so much Satanism at this point in the United States. I think we've got to expose it more fully. I intend to start doing that. Again, we're publishing a book, Post Hill Press, and I'm now become an acquiring editor of Post Hill Press. Well, the book is going to be on Silicon Satan, and it's going to fully reveal what goes on in Silicon Valley and the truth of it. My book, The Anti-Globalist Manifesto. I'm just beginning to start to market that. Again, I'm looking to the current project I'm working on right now is focused almost 100% on the election. That's where God's Five Stones is right now, my entire focus. And I'm trying to expose that the intelligence agencies are running the elections. That goes together with my theme that, in my book on JFK, the JFK was shot and killed by the government. And the Dr. Mantik's work on the X-rays, which he shows that the X-rays of Kennedy's skull at the autopsy, there's 3 X-rays, all 3 were forged to cover evidence of frontal shots. You can see 3 shots, one to the back of the head. That's frame 313 of the Zapruder film, 320. Less than 2 seconds later, Jack Kennedy's hit in the temporal bone. It blows out the back right of his head in the occipital region. At the same time, he's hit in the forehead, and you can see the stream of bullets go across the top of his head with the largest fragment to the back, most momentum, and it doesn't exit. We've been lied to for 61 years about Lee Harvey Oswald being the assailant, and none of the headshots to Jack Kennedy from the X-rays came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. And the government knew this from the beginning. This was an attempt to lie, to steal, an assassination. And I think we've been living in an intelligence agency Truman show since at least the 1960s. 1963, November 22nd, when Jack Kennedy was killed, I think marks a turning point in U.S. history, where the intelligence agencies have just increasingly decided to take over. And now they think they're fully in charge. They think they could even run an election and determine who's going to be president. They can't kill one, they'll elect one. And God knows they may have tried both this year. It's a dangerous time we're living in. These are really perilous times. But I think in the end, God's going to win. I've always had confidence that God wins. But we're going through a judgment of God, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pretty. We're going to be suffering a major economic decline. We're going to see these wars continue and escalate. We're going to be facing the prospect of nuclear holocaust. The critical element right now for me is that we cannot permit the Democrats to steal this election. If they do, we're doomed. If they do, I can't imagine that we'll really get through the judgment of God without a nuclear war. And I hate to say that, but again, what can be done to prevent it? Again, I'd say, take a look at God's 5 stones. We're going to be giving a lot of advice as to how to prevent the election fraud, steps to take. And this is essential if we're going to get involved and get engaged. If we do that, we have a great chance of exposing the evil and preventing it from taking over the country. In the end, God always wins. God created this place. God can pull the plug on this any day God wants. And Satan is not in charge. So therefore, we have the upper hand in terms of divine guidance. And if we only get down on our knees in the spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14 and repent for having let things get to this point, I think that's the formula we get in the Bible for how to invoke God's assistance. And the 2 Chronicles 7:14 makes clear that if we do repent, if we do engage in revival, God will hear the prayer and he will heal our land. This can be healed, but it's a desperate point right now, and it needs to be healed. We need every one of you and out there listening involved. Dr. Jerome Corsi, this is thetruthcentral.com. We're doing podcasts every weekday. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. God bless.